The world of true crime holds countless disturbing stories, but few are as layered and heartbreaking as this one. It is the story of a young woman who seemed destined for greatness, but whose entire life was an illusion. A stolen child raised under lies, a mother who longed for freedom, and a predator who left tragedy at every turn. At the heart of this mystery was a girl known to the world as Sharon Marshall. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, Sharon Marshall moved often with the man she lived with, known at the time as Warren Marshall, and because they rarely stayed in one place for long, her school records showed her in Oklahoma, Georgia, and Florida at different times. Teachers in each state described her as an excellent student, but they also noticed irregularities in her files. Transfers sometimes arrived without full documentation, and her earlier history always seemed unclear. The constant moving meant Sharon never had much of a chance to form lasting friendships. Each time she started fresh at a new school, she adjusted quickly, but by the time classmates began to know her, she was gone again. Neighbors from those years remembered that Warren was unusually strict. He controlled who Sharon spoke to, limited her social life, and even showed up at her schools without warning. Where most parents offered teenagers some independence, Warren remained a constant and watchful presence. By the mid-1980s, the moving finally slowed when Sharon enrolled at Forest Park High School in Georgia, and for the first time, she stayed long enough in one place to stand out as a gifted student. She finally stayed in one place long enough to show her full potential at Forest Park High School. Teachers described her as exceptionally bright, especially in math and science, and said she consistently ranked among the very best in her class, the kind of student who could have gone far in engineering or any scientific field she chose. Her classmates remembered her as soft-spoken and generous, the kind of person who helped others with their schoolwork, but never sought attention for herself, and many believed she was one of the most promising students in the school. In 1986, she graduated near the top of her class and earned a full scholarship to Georgia Tech, where she planned to study aerospace engineering. She often spoke about wanting to design satellites and dreamed of working one day at NASA. But during her senior year, she became pregnant, and although she carried the baby to term, the child was placed for adoption. Losing the scholarship meant she could not enroll at Georgia Tech, and that pregnancy marked the turning point of her life. To her classmates, it seemed unthinkable that someone so gifted and determined would suddenly give up her future. But those who were closer to her noticed how much influence the man she lived with had over her decisions. After her first pregnancy in 1986 ended with the baby placed for adoption, Sharon Marshall lost her chance to attend Georgia Tech. In 1988, she was living in Tampa, where she gave birth to her son, Michael Hughes. Friends from that period remembered how devoted she was to him, saying that even while she struggled with the pressures of her own life, Michael became her center and her focus. By 1989, Sharon and Clarence traveled to New Orleans, Louisiana, where they married under the names Clarence and Tanya Hughes. And later, that same year, she gave birth to a daughter who was placed for adoption shortly after birth. To support herself, Sharon worked as a dancer in Florida clubs, including Mons Venus in Tampa and others in St. Petersburg. Co-workers described her as polite and friendly, but also very reserved. She rarely socialized outside of work, and whenever Clarence appeared at the clubs, her entire demeanor changed. She grew quiet, cautious, and visibly tense. She sometimes arrived at the clubs with Michael, leaving him in the care of sitters connected to her workplace. And co-workers noticed that she carried herself with an exhaustion that came from trying to balance motherhood with life under Clarence's control. At Mons Venus, Sharon worked alongside Cheryl Ann Comesso, who was outspoken and confident. Cheryl often challenged Clarence directly, mocking the way he controlled Sharon, and several dancers remembered loud arguments between them inside the club. As the year went on, Clarence's hostility toward Cheryl became obvious to everyone around them. Then, later in 1989, Cheryl vanished. At the time, no one knew what had happened to her. In April 1990, Sharon and Clarence were living in Oklahoma City under the names Clarence and Tanya Hughes. Sharon was just 20 years old and caring for her young son, Michael, when, on the night of April 29th, she was found lying on the side of a highway with her groceries scattered across the road. A passerby saw her and called for help, and she was rushed to the hospital with critical injuries, including severe head trauma. But despite doctors' efforts, she died the following day, on April 30th, 1990. Clarence told investigators that Sharon was struck in a hit-and-run while carrying groceries home. But his story raised doubts. Police noticed inconsistencies in his account, yet without enough evidence they could not prove otherwise. For neighbors and friends, the news was devastating. Many had seen Sharon as a kind young mother doing her best to provide stability for Michael, and some even recalled seeing her earlier that same day, tired but still attentive to her son. Her sudden death shocked those around her and left behind not only a grieving toddler, but also a mystery that seemed to grow darker with time. After Sharon's death in April 1990, police treated the case as a possible hit-and-run, but doubts remained because her injuries and the circumstances did not fully match Clarence's explanation, even though investigators lacked the evidence to charge him. Their attention soon shifted to Sharon's young son, Michael Hughes, since Clarence claimed to be the boy's biological father and tried to gain custody. Because Sharon was gone, the court required legal proof of paternity before it could consider his request, and when Clarence could not provide documents, a DNA test was ordered. The results showed he was not Michael's biological father, and his petition was denied, leaving Michael in foster care. From that point on, authorities kept a close watch on Clarence, noting his volatility and the lengths he seemed willing to go to in order to get Michael back. At the same time, questions about Sharon herself grew stronger. Her records were incomplete, her past was unclear, and investigators realized they knew very little about who she really was. By 1994, 6-year-old Michael Hughes was living with a foster family in Choctaw, Oklahoma. His foster parents described him as a bright and affectionate child who adjusted well to their home. Clarence, however, refused to let go. He still claimed Michael as his son, despite the DNA results, and made repeated efforts to regain custody. On the morning of September 12, 1994, Clarence entered Indian Meridian Elementary School carrying a gun. He confronted school principal James Davis and forced him at gunpoint to take him to Michael's classroom. Once Michael was brought out, Clarence ordered both the principal and Michael into his pickup truck. Witnesses at the school immediately called police as word spread of the armed abduction. Clarence drove away with both hostages. After several hours, he released the principal unharmed on a rural road outside Oklahoma City. He kept Michael with him and disappeared. Despite an immediate manhunt by local and federal authorities, Clarence and Michael were not found. For Michael's foster family, teachers, and classmates, the abduction was sudden and terrifying. It was the last confirmed sighting of Michael Hughes alive. The FBI launched a nationwide search. He was already wanted as a fugitive for earlier crimes, including bank robbery and parole violations, and now he faced an additional charge of kidnapping. Investigators followed his trail through stolen vehicles and fraud, collecting witness reports that placed him in several different states, but each time they closed in, he managed to slip away, abandoning cars and switching identities to stay ahead of the chase. The search came to an end on November 16, 1994, when FBI agents surrounded him in Louisville, Kentucky, and arrested him after a tense standoff. Michael was not with him, and Clarence refused to say where the boy was. In 1995, he went on trial in federal court, facing charges of kidnapping, carjacking, and firearms offenses. Witnesses testified about the armed abduction at Indian Meridian Elementary School and described his history of violence. The jury found him guilty, and he received a 52-year federal prison sentence. But Michael's fate was still unknown. Clarence continued to insist he was Michael's father, even though DNA tests already proved otherwise. With Clarence in custody, investigators turned their focus to two larger mysteries: what truly happened to Michael Hughes and who Sharon Marshall really was. In April 1995, construction workers along Interstate 275 in Pinellas County, Florida, discovered human remains in a wooded area not far from where Sharon and Clarence lived during the late 1980s. Forensic analysis confirmed that the remains were those of Cheryl Ann Comesso, Sharon's former co-worker who vanished in 1989, and investigators determined she died from 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Around the same time, agents searched a stolen truck connected to Clarence and uncovered a sealed envelope containing 97 photographs. The images were disturbing. They showed Cheryl tied up, beaten, and eventually dead, leaving little doubt about Clarence's role in her disappearance. Witness testimony reinforced the evidence. Dancers from Mons Venus recalled heated arguments between Clarence and Cheryl, and one remembered Cheryl mocking the way he controlled Sharon only days before she vanished. With the photographs and witness accounts combined, prosecutors built a strong case. In 1997, Clarence went to trial for Cheryl's murder, and the photographs became the most decisive piece of evidence. The jury convicted him, and he was sentenced to death. For investigators, Cheryl's murder was resolved, but the greater mystery, the real identity of Sharon Marshall, remained unanswered. By the late 1990s, Clarence was still in prison while investigators struggled to trace Sharon's past. They searched for records under the name Sharon Marshall, but nothing explained her childhood. Schools in Oklahoma, Georgia, and Florida showed fragments of her history, yet transfer paperwork was missing, and no documents connected her to a family. Her later name, Tanya Hughes, only deepened the confusion. Investigators found no birth certificate, no childhood records, and no social security trail that made sense. The only official files linked to that name were her marriage documents to Clarence and the hospital paperwork from Michael's birth. Because the police kept reaching dead ends, journalists and outside researchers stepped in. Investigative reporter Matt Birkbeck followed the case closely, interviewing Sharon's classmates from Georgia, who remembered her as brilliant but admitted they knew nothing about her family, and her former co-workers from Florida, who described her as quiet, cautious, and always under Clarence's watch. Detectives in Oklahoma and Florida compared their notes again and again, but the pieces never fit. How could a promising high school student with a scholarship to Georgia Tech leave behind almost no documented past? By the early 2000s, both investigators and journalists agreed. Sharon Marshall lived under a false identity. The question of her real name remained unanswered, and Clarence refused to give them the truth. Journalist Matt Birkbeck began looking into Sharon's mysterious past, speaking with her classmates, co-workers, and teachers, and discovering that her school and personal records contained troubling gaps. In 2004, he published A Beautiful Child, a book that drew national attention and pushed investigators to reopen the case. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children worked with the FBI to follow new leads, collecting DNA samples and comparing them against files of missing children who might match Sharon. A breakthrough came in 2014 when investigators confirmed that Sharon Marshall was actually Suzanne Marie Sevakis, a girl from North Carolina who disappeared in the 1970s. Back in 1974, Suzanne's mother, Sandra Brandenburg, went to jail for writing a bad check and left her 4 children in the care of Franklin Delano Floyd, her partner at the time. When Sandra was released, only her infant son, Philip, was there. Suzanne and her sisters, Allison and Amy, were gone. Floyd had taken all 3. He later abandoned Allison and Amy at a children's home, where social services returned them to their mother, but Suzanne remained with him. Floyd raised her under false names, including Sharon Marshall and Tanya Hughes, keeping her true identity hidden for the rest of her life. When the FBI confirmed in 2014 that Sharon Marshall was really Suzanne Marie Sevakis, Suzanne's baby brother, Philip, was also taken by Floyd, but did not stay with him. He grew up elsewhere, under a different name and identity, unaware of his true past. For decades, his fate remained unknown, and his family believed he was lost forever. In 2019, investigators located him alive, and in 2020, DNA testing confirmed that he was Sandra's missing son, Philip Stephen Brandenburg. In 2014, the FBI interviewed Floyd in prison. He admitted that he kidnapped Suzanne as a child, and he also confessed that he killed Michael Hughes the same day he abducted him from school in 1994. Floyd said he shot Michael twice and buried him, but he refused to reveal where. Despite extensive searches, Michael's body was never recovered. Floyd never explained why he kept Suzanne while discarding the others. His words answered a few questions, but left many more sealed away forever. Suzanne Marie Sevakis lived her entire life under the control of Franklin Delano Floyd. She was gifted, ambitious, and earned a scholarship to Georgia Tech, yet her future was stolen from her. She became a mother, and friends remembered how deeply she loved her son Michael. But she never escaped the grip of the man who abducted her as a child. Floyd was convicted of multiple crimes, including the murder of Cheryl Ann Camesso, and he confessed that he killed Michael Hughes after taking him from school in 1994. He claimed he buried Michael, but he refused to reveal where, and searches never recovered the boy's body. Floyd received a death sentence in Florida and remained on death row for decades. He died in prison in January 2023, still carrying secrets about Suzanne and Michael that he never shared. For Suzanne's siblings, the confirmation of her identity brought answers, but also pain. After nearly 4 decades, they learned what became of their sister, yet the truth only deepened the tragedy of what she lost. The case closed with Floyd's death, but one haunting question remained. Where is Michael?